to be fair, I don't know where anything is, even in like my own town. I'm like, oh, there's a cheese shop here. I'm like, we, I mean, we moved here a few years ago, but no, but I mean, like, yeah, yeah, we moved here a few years ago, and the cover of night, like literally, and during the pandemic, and then for like, roughly a year, was hardly ever going, hardly ever went anywhere, and then I was working a lot, and I feel like in some strange way, I'm getting now finally acquainted with the town in which I officially reside. But it's but when anytime anybody says it, mentions any place like outside of the 8 or 10 block radius, I'm like, what?
Yeah. And to be fair, like even people in and around the area don't know specifically this town. It's a small town, and I tell people that I'm right across the bridge from Poughkeepsie.
Okay, sure, yeah. Well, yeah, I know where Poughkeepsie is.
Okay, that's fair. Yeah,
largely because I visited a college there, in 1987. But I don't know where it is.
Vassar, or they got a few of them up there.
I think it wasn't Vassar. It was Skidmore. Skidmore there?
No, it's Marist.
Huh?
Not Marist. Where's Skidmore? I don't know. I should. Yeah, I don't know. I guess we're in the same boat. I'm.
Where the hell is Skidmore? It's in Saratoga Springs.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I don't know. And I know where the fuck Poughkeepsie is from songs.
That's fine. Yeah. It's it's the last
3 hours
stop
from here.
Well, that can't be. Well, yeah. I don't know where you are, but I also don't want to.
I'm barely outside the city.
Okay, so I'm 2 hours north of the city.
Is a very generous description of where I live.
Not only that, but this is like pedantic. This is like talking about LA freeways. Like no one's going to care about this, but the conversation went, because I was I'm actually also from California, originally from the Bay Area, but I was in Queens for the last 20 years, and I moved up here last year. I finally had money to buy a house, and it's that I noticed. I was like, oh, he moved to upstate New York, and then I was like, oh, he moved to the Hudson Valley. Like nobody, that's a whole thing.
Well, yeah. Well, I used to think upstate New York was just like Westchester, just like as soon as you left the city, I would call. I mean, yeah. I don't know what you call that. Northern New York City, but yeah. But we're on the other side of the bridge, and like on the Jersey side. I mean, honestly, we're New Jersey light where I live, basically.
Recently, in the past year or two, have been kind of getting out and actually being able to do things in the neighborhood?
Well, I think because we came here in such a strange time, and I was particularly draconian and a complete, I mean, it's a bit ironic. I'm actually in this room in part because my son has COVID upstairs.
Oh, God. Jeez.
It's like never ending. I mean, he's totally fine. But, the only time I got it, of course, I, felt totally laid out for weeks. So anyway, but yeah, I mean, there was certainly that, and the fact that I think we kind of felt like we had 1 foot in and 1 foot out of here, because it felt somewhat transitory, because the ostensible reason we were here was for a job that I had on a TV show in Brooklyn, actually. Well, it was initially in New Jersey, which is how we ended up here, and then they moved to Brooklyn. So then it just turned out to be, we just ended up, sort of laying down roots here, especially my kids, who were really little at the time and beginning to go to school here. And one thing led to another, and the show sort of stayed on the air, and we kind of officially, we sold our house in Los Angeles. I think it's been about, I don't know, 2 years, maybe a little bit less, and bought a house here, and I mean, we're here now.
This was Equalizer?
Yes, right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
R.I.P.
R.I.P. Yeah, that TV shows are that's always an interesting one to me. Obviously, like, you don't know going into it how long it's going to last. It sounds like it lasted longer than than you
Well, my
expected.
record was always, I think for a while maybe George Clooney held the record of, you know, most most pilots or, most unproduced TV series or shortest long, living, shortest time on the air until ER or whatever it was. But I've done it honestly innumerable. I would have to really think about it. 11, something like that. TV series that have lasted a season or less. I did this show out here in New York called the Jim Gaffigan Show. That was 2 seasons. They were TV Land seasons, so I don't remember how many episodes we actually did. Um, and so, yeah, I always have gone into all these sorts of jobs with the assumption that they're going to fail. Uh, uh, and I thought maybe this had a better chance. It was such a weird time anyway. I don't know if that benefited it or if it hurt it. I really have no idea because it was really we began shooting in November of 2020, and um, I mean, as far as anybody knew, I mean, nobody knew what the hell was going on. Nobody knew if there was ever going to be, work again. And I had initially resisted, and actually I had turned down this job. I don't know how officially because I turned it down about 3 days before lockdown in March of 2020, and they came back over the summer and they said, we're shooting this, and um, you know, do they still want to do it, or does he want to do it at all? And yeah, I had some trepidation about doing it, but there was so little going on that it seemed sort of foolish to not take the bird in the hand. And that meant moving my really like young family, but it also the alternative at that point was so unclear. Everyone was on. My older boy was going to school remotely anyway. You know what I mean? It just no. It just felt like we might as well get the fuck out of our house. We were going completely stir crazy, and LA sort of felt in a way. I think I had been leaning in that direction anyway for a while. I think I had been wanting to. I had been actually sort of idealizing this place where we ended up living um, in advance of having any knowledge that I'd be shooting something out here. And in fact, had written a whole, basically a whole TV series for that, for talk about short lived for that. What the hell was it called? Quibi? What the fuck was it called?
Oh,
Humor.
yeah, the Quibi, the,
Um,
like, 5 minutes,
yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
So me and my writing partner had written this thing, but I had pitched it even long before that. I don't know, maybe not long, maybe a year or so before um, um, 2020, and it was essentially about it was about like a family who become these sort of unwitting influencers when they leave Los Angeles and move to this small town. And the small town that I was using as a reference was um, where we ended up moving, in part because my wife basically grew up here, and some of her friends had moved back here, namely the Chapin sisters, who actually appear on my record. And so one time when we were out visiting, I visited Lily Chapin's house, and I had really kind of idealized it. It was sort of the dead of winter, but we went next door to like go visit this farm where she was like getting her morning eggs from. And they have this incredible studio. I forget what it's called, but it's a studio of some, note that came with the house. And it's this amazing, just like 70s, just full recording studio. I don't remember who recorded there, but there's lore attached to it. And I just began thinking about this. It was sort of ruminating about it. And I guess I kind of sublimated the desire to go up and leave Los Angeles by having written this thing about this family that does that. And it ended up being somewhat prescient because, I mean, is it prescient or is it a self-fulfilling prophecy? Obviously, we had some agency over where we decided to go, and we picked here, and um, uh, you know, with the understanding that we would come back to LA over the summers and that eventually the show would end and we would move back home. But it kind of didn't end. And then the writer's strike and the actor's strike and all that just protracted everything. And I mean, really just years went by. And my kid, I mean, honestly, as soon as my kids began going to school, in earnest here, it started to feel really difficult to extricate them again. My older boy Bud, we've counted the amount of places he's lived in, and we sort of count that as 3 months or more. And I can't count them. It's five, it's six,
Mm.
7 places because when before we came out here, I was working kind of all over the place, and they would take him with me everywhere. And at a certain point, it felt like, yeah, we needed to kind of put down some roots. We thought we were doing that with this place in Los Angeles, but it turns out it was here. So there you have it.
It's funny to hear you describe, the show's, what I would say, success as it kind of didn't end, and I think that that's partially, but that's partially that expectation, and I'm sure that a lot of that again comes from, like, obviously incredibly difficult business, and you've been through the ringer a number of times. But do you find, because listen, I'm very similar when it comes to being extremely pessimistic about approaching projects, but do you find that that's just generally how you approach things, or that it's maybe kind of useful to kind of suss out worst case scenario and then it works out? And
Absolutely.
yeah.
There's something recently, I guess, kind of currently, that I'm sort of up for. Although I'm doubting that is still the case. It is as it is Thursday. Um, in, in the course of a week, I thought I would know something, but my friends keep saying, manifest it, manifest. I was like, you've got to be kidding. I actually
God,
tried that.
you're still talking to the LA people, huh?
Yeah, no, these are actually my New York friends. Um, and I have I have I've seen very little good come out of being positive, at least when it comes. Well, actually, when it comes to much of anything, because I guess I don't really see the point, because I know that it isn't. I know that you can be so negative that you become sort of self paralyzing, of course. But in terms of a positive expectation about something over which you have no control seems completely ludicrous to me, and tantamount to really believing in God, which I don't. So how could I possibly think that the power of positive thinking were any different than the power of Jesus Christ? And so um, and in fact, I found it quite beneficial. I mean, and I say this, in a somewhat, kind of humorous way, that when something doesn't turn out, it's not so surprising. I'm much more braced for it. But I've been through some very traumatic experiences, really in the last, I don't know, decade or so. A couple in particular where I feel like the years of negativity that I had, sort of braced myself for, came in somewhat handy in situations where I needed to kind of help hold up another person. And I felt prepared in some way, um, and unsurprised, because I think so much of what is sometimes can be very depressing or destructive or hurtful, comes in the form of something that's just totally shocking. But I feel like, for the most part, maybe barring being torn limb from limb, although I'm sure that's crossed my mind, I've prepared myself for almost every conceivable scenario that could have a negative outcome. And so, yeah, 100% going into projects, whether it's something that, hasn't happened and I want to have happen, or something that I am, creating and doing my best to, put my best foot forward, I still am very realistic about, yeah, my expectations, I think. And yeah, it's absolutely. I mean, and you know what? It's too bad, and a little bit, because I do feel like sometimes it's fun to be optimistic. I've experienced that as well, where you know, if you can have 5 or 10 days or 6 months or a year feeling like, man, this is going to be great. It's probably a better feeling than feeling like nothing, which is really kind of where I've managed to, it's not that I'm negative. I just try not to feel anything. And I don't know how great that is. And maybe it is okay to just feel really, really bad for, maybe feel worse for a shorter period of time, and feel positive for a longer period of time, if even it ends up amounting to something that is disappointing. Who the hell knows?
I 100% agree with you as far as like the, the manifestation thing, but also, I think that there is a risk, and maybe you've run into this. I've run into this for sure of, in sort of convincing yourself that you're not going to get something, that you're automatically maybe like self-sabotaging yourself, and maybe you're not really like throwing yourself
Yeah,
into it a way you would if you
sure.
believed you would get it.
Totally, totally. I mean, my experience with that is that it almost seems not to matter. I mean, that's just having lived a certain amount of years. Not that I don't think it could. I certainly think it could affect you one way or the other. I mean, there was a period of time I remember when I was going out on auditions where, I mean, it was I think a fairly lengthy period where I remember thinking like I was preparing myself by not caring, by almost being mad about it. And I remember on one instance, I got some very negative feedback. It's the only time I actually remember hearing this from a representative or an agent or whatever, but they did say something like, "What's wrong with him?" or "He had a bad attitude," or something like that. And I mean, it was really just a form of defense and a way to overcome nerves. I mean, I've dealt with this a lot in terms of just um, even if it's public speaking, that sometimes you're so paralyzed with anxiety that I mean, I forget acting. I mean, I have this with like flying. I have this with anything about which I might have a kind of a somatic, a reaction to. Uh, I mean, I find my instinct is to get mad about it, and then in other instances to try really, really hard to be indifferent or apathetic, as a form of self preservation. So I mean, um, but I haven't necessarily. I mean, there are other things into which I've thrown myself absolutely completely. Think I've been like, could not be more forthcoming or passionate or whatever, and it's also doesn't seem to make any difference. So I don't, I think in the end, I mean, it depends, of course, what we're talking about here. I mean, if you're talking about art, I think that's different. If you're talking about, work, um, that it's just, it's a different modality, but
Yeah, I mean, work is art, and art is work for you, right? I mean, in both of these
sometimes,
cases.
I mean, sort of, I mean, occasionally they overlap. I actually think they're more bifurcated than I wish they were, but yeah.
Sure, I guess, and I guess I would make the distinction. There's the, there's the sort of the self defense mechanism of like the of fear of failure of that you're not going to get it. But then, and I wonder like if this applies to your music, because like I mean I would say like generally speaking for you, maybe music is a little bit lower stakes because like your entire livelihood and your family's livelihood maybe isn't
Yeah,
quite
totally.
dependent on
Yeah,
it
no, if anything, I'm
in the
flushing
same
our
way.
livelihood. Yeah, I'm flushing it down the toilet. But my wife is right. She's been doing these meetings in this room, and she's like, the lighting in here is awful. We got to get one of those, uh,
Like a
what are
ring
they called?
light, yeah. Ring light.
Ring light.
Yeah, yeah.
I was like, I'm not. I'm like, I'm just not. I will refuse on principle to ever get a ring light. But yeah, the
It's not the
conflict is
worst.
real.
I'm not using the video for this, I'm just
Yeah,
using it
yeah,
to
no, it's
talk to
fine.
you,
I
so
was
that's fine,
just looking at this.
but
I was like, Jesus Christ.
also
Um,
she's not wrong.
yeah, well, not flattering. So, anyway, yeah, with music, I don't know. It's funny because I spent the entire day today prior to talking to you, more or less, writing. I've been writing a book, basically, a memoir of sorts, and um, it's funny because when you're doing it, you feel as much pressure on yourself. There's a thing when you're writing where you can really get hung up over sentence structure, over choosing the right word, instead of just
Oh,
getting
I
an idea
know.
out and coming
Yeah.
back to it later, right? And this is a problem I've often had, and it's a problem I've had with making films, where letting what's the expression, the
Perfect be the enemy of good, or
of the good,
yeah.
exactly, yeah. And so I I definitely am a bit of a victim of that sort of aphorism. whatever it is I'm doing, and that includes music. So while yes, on the one hand, I don't feel like my family's livelihood depends on it. On the other hand, I feel the stakes feel pretty high to me. And so, and sometimes I step back and think, well, this is a ridiculous amount of, you know, whether it's money or agitation or self-criticism or just time. I mean, in the case of the last of this current or this record I'm putting out, I mean, it took longer than I mean, almost longer than anything I'd ever done, except maybe my first film, which in many ways I made over a period of several years. But anyway, and so I think you have to do that, otherwise you probably wouldn't be or I wouldn't be feel very motivated to complete it. In fact, at several points today, I thought like, what the fuck am I doing? I could just go walk away and hang out upstairs. I don't need to do this. But if you don't, and you don't place that kind of, um, um, attach that kind of importance to it, it's hard to complete, I think. So, Um, and conversely, oftentimes I find that the job I'm doing really is something, sometimes, not always, but something, you know, I can do, one can do somewhat mindlessly. Um, I mean, it really depends on the work. Um, but I mean, I described what I was doing, on the Equalizer as a, it was almost like a exercise, like um, like Wordle. Like I was like being paid to do Wordle or something like that, where uh, I had, was given kind of an insane amount of gobbledygook to
Oh yeah, you were like a
process.
hacker, right?
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
it's the man in the chair as I
Yeah.
realized I would see myself referred to, but um, it's that he's the classic supplier of
Exposition.
exposition, yeah, and
Yeah.
all that, and so and oftentimes it would be condensed. The work would be condensed, sometimes into a day, sometimes over several days, and I realized, it was keeping me really facile in some ways. Was probably better than like using, I don't know, like taking a bunch of CoQ10. But but it wasn't, it wasn't like, I mean, I don't think it's out of line or surprising to hear that it was not something that was necessarily pushing the boundaries of myself artistically. And so in that regard, it was just a different muscle, and I felt very committed to to exercising it in as proficient a way as I possibly could. But it's almost an entirely different muscle than I would be employing, sitting down and trying to write, I guess.
Is there room in a situation like that, especially after having done that specific role in that specific show for so long, where um, where it can get a little bit more creative when it doesn't just feel like you're kind of like doing a job, or you're just Mr. Exposition dump, or is it really just kind of going to work to a certain extent?
I mean, it's not as though they didn't make efforts to. Um, I mean, as time went on, I mean that they'd do things like my character writes and plays music, and so I played, wrote a silly song, or I actually, I mean, I must be one of the few people on uh, a procedural uh, network television show to have ever played a loop pedal while singing like Heart of Gold. I mean, I think at one point, um, was it Heart of Gold or was it Old Man? Now I can't remember, but somehow, they were
A
like,
Neil Young song, yeah,
it was a Neil Young. It was one of the debate,
yeah.
and I did the same with a Pixies song, where I ended up recording that. I mean, they had asked me if I would do a Billy Joel song, and I said, "Well, can I do a Pixies song?" And they said, "Okay."
he's
So,
like the Gen X Pixie, Gen X Billy Joel,
right,
really.
exactly, yeah. So, um, but so there would be that, but I mean, they'd be pretty. I mean, it was pretty out of context. I mean, obviously
Sure.
the general vibe of the show is that it's a procedural television show. But so I think the only thing that maybe felt where I felt like I really needed to sort of stand for something was this episode about anti-Semitism, and
Mm.
that was something about which I um, felt more emotionally connected. It's hard to 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 dissociate it from what you're doing, which is still a 43-minute or however long they are with commercials, television show on CBS at 8 or 8:30 or 9 or 9:30, depending on, football. But, I did manage to feel somewhat integrated as a human when I did that episode. Yeah.
What was the impetus? What was the sort of initial germ for sitting down and starting to write, I guess, a memoir?
That's an excellent question. And it's weird because well, I'll just say this much. It's not a memoir in the conventional sense, although I'm sure it can't possibly be the first time someone's done exactly what I'm doing. It's a little bit more about the writing of a memoir and what that process is like. And in within that, um, I take a kind of, you know, for lack of a less pretentious reference, Proustian right turn or left turn, and traverse some of my sort of backstory. But Um, it was weird. I don't know, and there's a kind of an automation to it, and it's a little almost about that, so that's also somewhat weird, but it was right after the show. It's right after I heard that Equalizer wasn't coming back, and it was before I realized that I was Rip Van Winkle and I had just woken up 5 years later in a completely new landscape after two long strikes and a pandemic, and that the entire landscape of trying to find a job would be almost entirely different. Um, Although I had heard a lot about that during the course of my run on this show, I would remind myself, I mean, daily, that I was very lucky to be employed, and I'm glad that I had the you know self awareness to appreciate that. Unfortunately, you can't quite put that in the bank for later. Um, anyway, so because in the subsequent 11 months or 10 months or however long it's been since we did that show, I've come to realize like shit is really fucking weird, and I would argue a little bit scary out there in a way that I have never personally experienced, just because my career had a kind of sort of semi-automated kind of life to it. And but anyway, having said that, it couldn't have been more than a couple of weeks. In fact, I started writing it before we even found out. So however long it was until we found out, maybe a month or so. Um, I don't know. I think there were a few things, and I discuss it in the book, but um, one of them is that I'm getting older. Um, and I guess while I have a bunch of stories or whatever that I feel like maybe need to be archived in one place, I suppose I was doing something akin to, and I do reference this in the book, a Swedish death cleaning, where you, um, and I've been doing that in my, non-literary sort of terrestrial life as well, where I'm a big collector of things. I take a lot of photographs. I document quite a lot. Long before social media, I was doing social media for like two or three people, who cared, and so I just have a lot of shit, and I've been trying to kind of sell it, organize it, get it out of storage, and in many ways, I'm trying to do that with yeah, my life. I mean, I guess the same reason anybody writes about their life. And it's also about this, the process of being a creative person who is a little bit, who can be paralyzingly hard on themselves, and how difficult it is to sort of want to express yourself, but be so critical of that kind of, what it is and how it is that you're expressing yourself. And so, yeah, it's kind of, I guess, operating on those two levels.
To a certain extent, is that how you end up, for example, playing like every single or just about every single instrument on a record? Is that kind of like hyper self-criticism or that perfectionism that you just feel like at a certain point, I just have to do it all myself if I want to get it right?
Well, I mean, if I want to get it, I think it's more that if I just want to get it done the way that I want to get it done. But certainly, I am. I mean, if, I I am
I'm not suggesting
very
that you're like necessarily like think that you're the greatest musician in the world, but just
right,
in
right,
like
yeah.
this is what's in my head and I'm trying to get it out.
Yeah, no, well, yeah, there's a thing, and I think a lot of artists or musical artists feel this way, where they kind of make a demo and they can never get that quality back, when they go in and to a studio setting. I mean, I've had that even with my own self-recording. So like I'll demo something and then I'll record it myself, and still somehow I feel like I've lost whatever that magic was. I mean, I'm an extremely rudimentary player, and my first instrument was drums, but I only ever got kind of so good, and I'm as good as that now. I mean, so in other words, however good I was when I was 14, I mean, there were plenty of amazing 14-year-old drummers. I was not one of them. So however good I was at 14, I'm pretty much that good right now. I didn't really learn guitar, and I did it in a very kind of clunkily autodidactic way when I was, in my early 20s, when, and I did it really in conjunction with writing songs and recording them. So to me, it was always part and parcel of the same process in a way. It was not necessarily, I mean, I like writing songs, but it was as much about kind of getting them on record, and a much about the sort of sensory experience of recording. Um, and and then as time went on, yeah, I had bands, I had people that I played with. There are lots of, people in the first two records I made. This band that I worked with quite a bit in LA called Black Pine is on the first record, which was under another moniker called Landy. And some of the stuff was, we're home recordings. Some of the stuff I did with Stephen Droz of the Flaming Lips at Trent Bell's studio in Norman, Oklahoma. And it was this kind of hodgepodge of several years of recordings. And then a lot of it we completed or started from scratch at Aaron Espinosa's studio, Aaron Espinosa of Early Mart in Los Angeles, or in Eagle Rock. Um, and then the second one was like, oh, I want to just like go in there with like a set of musicians. So I like my friend Eric, who's my writing partner, and my old friend, my best friend, and we went to high school together. Like he plays bass on everything, and everybody's playing like more or less a certain instrument. Me and Aaron are kind of playing a bunch of different things, and so that has a more cohesive sort of band studio vibe to it. But then after that, I- you got to figure out a way to play it. So now you're playing with people who are willing to play either for free or because we're a band, but whose band is it really? And isn't it effectively my solo project? And so that gets a little dicey. And then you're paying people to play. And, in the end, it just became more practical to just record the stuff on my own. And so for the third and fourth records, my friend and musician and collaborator on these other projects, Andrew Lynch, he recorded me. So while I was playing everything except for strings, which my wife and my friend Merritt played, and for horns, which Andrew played, I did play everything, but that was really partly just a function of, I mean, really convenience. And then when I did this record, it was kind of unexpected because I sort of thought I was done. I had I had made four records. I don't do it professionally. In fact, it costs me a lot of money, really. And I've had two kids. I have two kids now. It's been several years. The last record I made was also a photography book, gallery show, and an exhibition where Andrew and I played music. And it was a lot, and it was consuming, and it took a long time. And I just wasn't, I didn't feel like I had it kind of in me anymore. But then I found myself sort of slowly but surely fucking around, and before I knew it, I had kind of demoed something, and then I became really interested, as I always had been, in the engineering process. And so the record became a little bit about building a studio and a little bit about expressing myself as a songwriter. Whereas before it was almost always about expressing myself as a songwriter or as a sonic, you know, kind of, as a form of sonic expression. And this is that, but it was also about like, I got to learn how to use a patch bay and I got to learn how to use, and I got to use, and I only decided not to do, I mean, I had this pal, Mackenzie, who's this fucking unbelievably amazing drummer for the band Midlake, one of my very favorite bands. And he's like, send me what you're doing. Just send me a click track and I'll drum on it. I was like, great. And I talked to Espinoza and Aaron was going to mix it. And then I was like, I don't know, man. I already demoed the drums and now I kind of want to see if I can just get a good snare sound. Cause, like it's interesting to me. And I've always like, you know, it's like motorcycle maintenance. I mean, I until I got run over recently or a couple years ago, which was maybe another reason why I wrote this or started writing this book, by a neighbor of mine on a motorcycle. I suddenly got really heavy into the maintenance aspect of it, where I had never, I had always been, when I used to ride a million years ago, I barely knew how to ride. I was just really, again, it was, never went to like school for riding or whatever. And once I get kind of fixated on a certain project or the technical aspects of a certain project, whether it's like learning how to, fix your toilet or put a recording studio together, I get very consumed by it and it becomes this really immersive experience. And so, yeah, one thing led to another. And in that case, there was just, I mean, yes, there are musicians around here, but I didn't feel like getting to know people and figure out how to work that out. Um, and so I thought, oh, well, I've demoed stuff. I've certainly done a certain amount of mixing and recording, and let's see if I can take this as far as I can take it, which would be to the mastering phase, and then hand it off to my master, Mark, who's mastered all my stuff in Los Angeles. But anyway, so yeah.
Listen, a few years ago, this was like, well, longer than a few years ago now, because this was like height of the pandemic. I'm on a date in we go to Central Park, right? Because we can't go inside because it's the pandemic, right?
Yeah,
And I'm talking, I'm just like, it's cold, it's outside. I'm talking to this woman, and then an ambulance drives by behind me, and I'm like, hey, can you just give me just a second? Like, I can't, when this ambulance is happening behind me, I can't hear what you're saying.
Yeah.
And she goes, do you think you might be autistic? And I was like, oh, God, come on. And then I started thinking about it for a few years, and like, man, I'm hearing, like, I just, the way, like, there's just certain things. And when I talk to people about certain things where it's just like, and I think like, people of our general age group, like, really underdiagnosed at the time, and I really relate to this conversation about just really sort of like just kind of clicking into something and really sort of bearing it in there and really getting in that groove.
Funny. I just started seeing a new therapist after my entire life in therapy, off and on, since I was a teenager, and it's the first time, really, the first time. She said, have you ever been diagnosed as autistic? And I said, well, no. We were talking about both my son and myself because my older boy is, my wife and I joked that I really pooped out a mini me. And,
which, by the way, I saw like I think on your Instagram, he like looks exactly like you.
Well, he looks like me, and he also, and it's funny. I'm wary of saying this in such a way that
yeah.
No. Well, I don't know. I've said so many things in so many forums I probably shouldn't have, but no. I'm wary of not giving him of somehow disavowing him his own identity and agency,
his personhood.
And all that. But yeah, it's his personhood. But there are these uncanny similarities, not the least of which is that he gets distracted by things that he wants to do and then immerses himself completely into those things. And yes, he's somewhere in the ADHD spectrum. And my mother has recently said as much about herself, and it's very clear that that's probably something that went undiagnosed with me. And but no one had ever said, had you been diagnosed as autistic? I was like, well, I mean, I know I had been evaluated. My son was evaluated. He wasn't technically on the spectrum. And she's like, but what about you? And when you were evaluated, it was like, it was the dark ages. And I was like, I guess, yeah. I mean, whatever. There's not much I'm going to be doing differently about it. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's very clearly something, over which I never feel like I have much control. I used to say that about, I don't know if you're hearing that. Probably not. I hope. I'm going to turn that off.
No, I'm not. I'm not.
Okay, good. It's just someone texting constantly. So yeah, I when I've thought about, like, for instance, why I do music, it's for a while, for a bunch of years. I mean, I really felt like I just didn't have a choice. I didn't even want to be doing it. It in many ways, it was very time consuming. It was economically completely um, counterintuitive.
I know you played a little bit live, but you don't really tour, and that's
Right,
where
and
the
I'm not a
lead
person
generally
who
comes
wants to get
from.
out there
And
and play all the time.
yeah,
Exactly. I'm not. That's not a need or desire. And if anything, I've done it very grudgingly. I mean, most notably when my wife and I and Andrew went to go promote the eponymous Goldberg Six Sisters record, which was my second record, and it was, we had a legitimate label, PS America, which was a subsidiary of PS, this label and distributor in Europe. And so, we found ourselves at the fucking, like, on a BBC radio show. And I just was, I mean, talk about um, uh, feeling and just totally displaced and having imposter syndrome
yeah.
to the nth degree. That's just not. It's neither my strong suit, musically, nor dispositionally. So it was just that I really, it was just a way that I was expressing myself um, for a period, again, in this very automated way. And then at some point I said, well, Jesus Christ, I have hundreds of recordings or partial recordings and songs. I mean, I used to say that making the first record was really just a way of offloading my hard drives, I mean, because nothing was, well, I had a lot of tape recordings, but even those tape recordings were digitized. So you know what I mean? And, and, and those hard drives, for the more or less for the most part, did get, sort of, get offloaded. Um, and years went by, and I just kind of diddle on the guitar here and there and make a loop once in a while, and my, with a loop pedal or my board or whatever, or screw around with an effect. But yeah, again, like, something sort of clicked, and maybe it was having been on this show for so long and being in kind of relative isolation where we live, and the kids getting older and not needing, you know, quite as much attention. Um, but I got into it and I went hard, in terms of, my immersion into it.
Obviously, in some ways, too early in the process to speak about this definitively as we're recording this. The album, I think, is still coming out in February, but up to this point, having finished it, and I think you were there was like a video of you, like, kind of doing the unboxing. What have you gotten out of the process?
Well, it's funny. I was looking at the records, which are now sitting they're in the studio in the area where I had the drums set up, and now I've made like a little workout space. And I was like, you have those, and it's a weird, and it was interesting to see the boxes of records in the same space where I had been recording, and to think back to these periods where I was a song in, two songs in, had partial recordings, couldn't figure out a section, was, pulling out my hair, was 4 or 5 months in, and I said to myself, Jesus Christ, I can't, I mean, there was no light at the end of the tunnel, but to, I just refused to not finish and see it through. And to me, honestly, that's it. I mean, beyond that, there's not much more I can get out of it. I don't. It is weird, and there is a postpartum to it because I don't,
Mm.
sort of. I wouldn't call it quite depression, but nostalgia or melancholy about it because I don't take the music with me and I don't even know how to play it. I mean, I could probably play one song. I think I did for some Instagram account you know, um, I mean, this often happens. I mean, this happens with everybody. I mean, you have to learn the songs that you recorded, particularly if they weren't written out in a conventional way, which very few were. A lot of it was, they were written and recorded in conjunction with one another. And so, yeah, there's this weird feeling of like, wow, you really do kind of seal the process hermetically once you put it in the vinyl shrink wrap. It like really is just done and kind of finite, and bookended. But that's, I guess, what I do. I mean, that's as much as I do with it. And anything beyond that, really, I mean, people. I mean, I don't really care at this point. I certainly did for a while. Oh, is this a vanity project? Well, of course, every form of artistic expression is a vanity project. I mean, who are you doing it for? But um, you know, but the going out and playing, like, that part does feel a little bit like a vanity project because, I mean, I'm not gonna sell any records here. I mean, maybe I'd sell a few more if I went somewhere and sold them, or had a merch stand or whatever, but, I'm not booking stadiums or even, most clubs. So, and I don't even know with whom I would be doing that. I would have to learn everything and do it on my own. But there is a kind of a sadness that it's over, and an otherness to it, which always has kind of permeated. I mean, I jokingly called us the Goldberg sisters, or it started out as a sort of a kind of a wry statement about there being some other people in this band, I guess. For a while, there was this ongoing thing about my twin sister, Celeste, and that she was really the mastermind or whatever, mistress mind behind this. And in some ways, I remember Elvis Costello a million years ago wrote a song called My Science Fiction Twin, which I guess weirdly I copped without sort of consciously realizing it. But it was sort of how he viewed his creative process, which felt like, I keep using this word, but sort of automated, something over which he almost seemed like he had no control. And I'll listen to these old records and I'll be like, wow, that's fucking crazy. Like, I mean, there's enough repetition and overlap and the chord changes and the sonic elements that it starts to become, pretty obvious to me that I'm participating in it. But sometimes, it does feel like somebody else did this stuff. And it's a kind of a cool feeling, and it's a kind of weird feeling of detachment, and I think partly because I don't generally support it in any kind of live way, you know?
It jumped out at me when you said automated before in reference to your career because I remember when I first kind of figured out who you were, having seen you in things, and there was just such a disconnect, like everybody else, again, my general age group was, obsessed with Dazed and Confused, but like, oh, that this is the guy on Friends and all these
Right.
yeah, automated is an interesting word because like your career makes no sense.
It doesn't make a ton of sense, and, like and, and I have been really poring over it because I have been writing this thing and, trying to I'm not really trying to make sense of my career as much as I am my life, but it is curious to me, for instance, that I got offered Friends. Like, based on what exactly? I mean, I'm not saying I didn't audition in those days. I did. It's just that, and this has been how my career has operated, where most of the stuff that I've gotten that of any note, I didn't work very hard to get the job, and 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 the stuff that I've worked the hardest to get, or campaigned the most for, you know, I didn't do, and I often wonder.
Now we're explaining. Now we're explaining the pessimism, the stuff you've
Oh
really
yeah,
worked
no,
hard.
there's
Yeah,
just, well, it's not even it's at a certain point, it's just a fact
yeah,
that if I audition for things, chances are
sure.
probably 85% chance. I mean, everybody probably has an 85, 95% chance of not getting, or 99% chance of not getting a role. But it's just interesting that very early on in my career, and I didn't have, and I still don't have a career where, like, I didn't do this thing and then suddenly I was like, oh my God, who's that guy? It was that I did this thing, Dazed and Confused, let's say, came home, had to audition for a bunch of shit, got a guest star playing like a delivery guy on the show called Love and War. Then, Diane English, the creator of Murphy Brown, had created. And then she was like, we're writing this new show. Do you want, we're writing this character for you. I'm the first person cast in their follow up to that series. I didn't have to do
Hmm.
hardly anything. But it wasn't because I was the next nothing. This just was never the case. I wasn't, um, you know, and, and, I might have been auditioning for this TV show or that TV show, but Friends, I just remember getting a phone call and saying, like, it's a 2 or 3 episode arc. You have to start Friday. I think it was a Wednesday. And I said, no, this was the second season, I think, of the show. I was like, I don't like that show. And my agent was like, no, you got to do it. I was like, oh man. I was like, okay. But I don't know what the hell they saw. Me playing like this kind of crazy, wacky stalker guy. I mean, there was nothing I had done at that point that would. I mean, I played a schizophrenic on ER. I don't even remember if that was before or after, but it wasn't funny. Anyway, so yeah.
Your agent was right. I mean, let's be honest, right? I
Oh
mean,
yeah, no, he was totally right. I
yeah,
mean, for a long time, I sort of resented it because it seemed to eclipse almost anything else I
sure.
had ever done. But to the point where after I did Saving Private Ryan, I was like, if this Friends thing is going to continue to haunt me, the least they could do is have me back. And so my agent called, and they said, no, we don't really see it happening. And I was like, really? There was a whole kind of setup for you know it at the end of the episode when Lisa Kudrow says something about him being cute or something. I don't know, but and yeah, I mean, what can I? Yeah, and yeah, what can I say? There's just does not, you know, I have I've I've told sort of representatives over the years, I've been like, look, this is not an ego thing. I'm happy in many cases, not always, but I'm happy to, like, let's say, read for this. I'm just telling you that if I do, it's more unlikely that I won't get it. And if you hold out, you might stand a better chance of me getting it. But what I think it really is that I'm just peculiar enough that if people l- like, if I have to prove to someone that I'm right for something, I'm not going to get it. And that if someone, but, and the stuff that you've seen me in, it's because that's who they thought of to be in it. I mean, Fargo is the best example because, um, um, the creator of that show was also the creator of The Unusuals, and he had asked me to be in that. I mean, it was like a whole, like, wind and dine at Musso and Frank's, and will you play this role on this ABC show? And I read it, and I'm like, I don't really want to play this neurotic guy. What if I played this kind of guy with a death wish? And they said, okay, let's check with the network. The network was like, okay. I was like, okay, great. And so then I do The Unusuals, and it doesn't last more than a year. And then a few years later, he asks me to do Fargo, and I'm just finished. I hadn't even finished directing for this movie I'd written and was directing and acting in, called No Way Jose, and it was to play this character on Fargo, who has to speak ASL, sign language. And I said, Jesus, I don't know that I'm going to be prepared enough, and I want to do this role justice, and this looks really cool and everything, but I'm afraid I might have to just not do this. I just don't want to show up and fuck it up and do the show a disservice and do ASL disservice. Deaf people have been playing a deaf person, but
Yeah.
I'm working with a hearing impaired person, and so um and he was like, just get through this one scene. And this one scene was 3 days after I wrapped the film, and I had to be on a plane to Calgary and blah, blah, blah. And then we'll worry about it. We'll worry about the rest. Okay. But, like, you know, And now in the last 11 months, I'm like auditioning my fucking ass off, like, in this, you know, like putting myself on tape, which I never did before. Because if anything, if I had any, I always felt like, if I had a strong suit, it was, meeting people and engaging with them, talking about it and talking about the work and whatever. I mean, this whole putting yourself on tape and sending it in to the ether thing is gonna destroy this fucking industry. I mean, it's already it's a real shame. I mean, it's a real fucking shame. I mean, it's sort of like the next step to AI. It's the next step to just, you being this kind of just ethereal, sort of bunch of, you know, sort of cells that you're, uploading onto a server, and just completely dehumanizing the experience. So I mean, whether it's a harbinger of of things to come, or it's just a coincidence, I don't know, but it's certainly dehumanizing, and I can't imagine that it's the right way to go about casting things. I mean, I always thought auditions themselves were sort of ludicrous, which is why when I had made films, I was looking at people's interviews on YouTube just so I could hear them talk, and then I would maybe meet them in person, and often cast them off of a photograph. I mean, people are just fucking terrified. They're just fucking terrified, that if they don't see that person do exactly what they imagine that person should be doing, that somehow they're going to be making a mistake. I guess I don't know.
First of all, you have to get a ring light. I think that's the number one.
Well, it's funny is because usually I was like, you talk about like this thing about like, how much are you going to invest into it or not? I'm like, oh, fuck this. I don't want to do this. Fuck it. I'm going to just do it on my phone. But the next thing you know, I'm like doing wigs. In a weird way, I've actually had a lot of fun with it because, I mean, it kind of, in a strange way, harkens back to like the kind of stuff I used to do when I was 7 or 8 years old and putting on little mix 'em ups and sketches for my parents, but that is kind of what it feels like. It's such a bizarrely masturbatory process. I mean, it's just you with your bag of tricks and a, funny. I got a bald wig, that I cannot believe did not get me this one role. I mean, who got it is, who's the actor? Well, it wasn't a coincidence. It was because the guy is a real guy, and the guy they hired really looks like the real guy. And I was trying to make myself look like the real guy, and it was kind of fun. But I mean, I've always said my best work is not really on the cutting room floor, but it's it's on the it's like hiding in the annals of casting directors' hard drives. But
as we were talking about almost sort of like recording a record and the way in which for you it's like sealing it in a vault. I obviously a lot of musicians. You talk to a lot of musicians. I speak to a lot of musicians as well. And one of the interesting things that we come back to a lot is the process of touring and going back and having to revisit and re-engage with old songs in order to play them live, and how the life that song takes on, the new meanings that it takes in your life. But what your old songs, they're locked in these vaults. Obviously, like you're not touring on them. I assume you're not sitting there probably listening to them all that often. What is your relationship, if at all, to those old albums?
Well, I mean, honestly, this actually happened strangely by accident today, because when I was trying these headphones on, these Apple headphones. Wait, shit, am I back?
Yep.
Okay. So I don't usually use these because the battery life sucks, and we have to go on a whole tangent about Apple AirPods Max, but anyway. But I knew it would connect really easily, and I wouldn't have to.
You sound great.
But
yeah.
But when I turned them on, it started playing a not just an old song, but an old song from the third record that was like, while in the process of recording, we would bounce things to disc or whatever, and this was like the bass and drums tracks of a song that I had recorded, which I really like actually. And I was like, damn, that shit sounds fucking good.
Oh, so you like just like had like the wave file just sort of like
Oh
sitting
yeah, no,
there?
I
Yeah.
literally put the headphones on and
Yeah.
I mean Apple phone I have stuff products are so weird. I mean it like immediately connected and then I was like I hit a button and then it started
Yeah.
playing that. Now I don't know why that wasn't the last thing I was listening to or anything, so it just I don't know why. But yeah, every once in a while I will listen to an old recording and in this and recently I was because I was A-Bing stuff that I was recording now to some other stuff to see if I was like in the ballpark because this was the
Mhm.
first time I had engineered and entirely, um, from soup to nuts and mixed stuff and mixed, everything. And so I wanted to kind of just get an ear check every once in a while. And yeah, again, it's like I'm often pleased. Sometimes I'm frustrated, that I can't change it, and then because I'm not playing live, I can't rearrange it. Um, but often I find myself just sort of pleasantly sort of surprised. And for a while, there was a set grouping of songs, for I don't know, between and around, I guess, like that second record that I was promoting, um, really around that time, so 2011 or whatever, where there was a kind of a group of songs that I was playing over and over again from the first record and I guess the second record. Um, but But yeah, but then there are other times where it's, it's so alien to me and it's hard to imagine having written some of them. So I mean, even with this like latest thing, I mean, I was doing this music video and I never really do music videos where like I'm lip syncing or whatever, but I wanted to there's a little motif in the music video for this single, The Great Resignation, which the Chapin sisters are singing on. And so they're in the video and they're kind of singing the chorus, but most of it is just a bunch of landscape stuff. But it cuts kind of back and forth between them singing and this kind of driving around stuff and then me playing the piano. But it's really more me trying to work out the song. And I was like trying to work out what the hell I had done, but like in real time in the video. And I was like, can't quite remember how I did this. Um, and but anyway, that's just more a product of me being maybe a better songwriter than performer.